just a second while we get both streams online. I don't know why they don't just have a button where you can just like start them both, but they don't. What is the major malfunction? All right. Okay, it looks like we're live in both streams now. So the theme of this stream basically is taking back Independence Day. I was planning on doing a music stream yesterday, but I decided on the one hand that I didn't want to compete with the fireworks and the parties and stuff, but also I have mixed feelings about Independence Day. For one thing, I feel like it's always been a farce. The story that I was told in second grade, I think, or first grade, was that somehow the colonies that were divided against each other and had like rudimentary weapons and are split down the middle with half of them supporting the crown, defeated the British, who could have called on all of their allies, and and the story was that they lost because they stood in rows and just let the colonists pick them off. And I always thought, there's no way. How do you become the most powerful empire in the history of the planet at the time with bad martial strategy? It just doesn't make any sense. So, there's that. And then there's also the fact that the political indoctrination, the propaganda machine is on full blast. People are, I don't need to tell you guys, And from the outside looking in, it's such an absurdist theater. It's so easy to see the propaganda. It's so easy to answer the key bono, who benefits, when people start rattling off the narratives that have been placed in their mouths by their overlords. And it just occurred to me, what's going on, guys, that the only reasonable answer for those of us that are paying attention is to declare our own sovereign independence, our independence from the overlord religions, our independence from nationalism, which you might call patriotism, but I got news for you folks. That is just branding. You're not an American. You're not Chinese. You're a human on a planet. And it is so deeply ingrained in people that this loyalty to an abstract symbol is somehow a moral obligation, and that you have failed as an individual if you do not have this patriotism, this nationalism. And I had a couple of friends come by that are very much right-wing, and I had a lot of conversations with them, and eventually it came up, this thing of I love my country. And I said, well, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean you love your neighbor, even if they're, a liberal transgendered person? Does it mean you respect their position on all of these political ideas that you disagree with? Does it mean that you are blindly, devoted to this government, to this abstract symbol of flag? And this is one of those subjects that it's really hard to talk to people about because it's so deeply ingrained in us that this is an essential part of being a decent person, to have this patriotism. What does it even mean? And so, considering all this, I thought we must declare our own independence from all of this stuff. We have to recognize ourselves as completely independent sovereign beings. Before I get too much deeper into this, though, I want to offer a couple of updates. So I was supposed to do this initiation for this, to enter this community up in the mountains, and it didn't happen. It's happening tomorrow. I'm going to meet with someone from the community, and it turns out it's actually not 40 minutes away. It's 10 hours, like, up. And I guess you can't even get there during the rainy season. So suddenly, I'm sort of confronted with this situation where, you know, Sunday I meet the guy, and then we're supposed to leave Monday. And the way they were talking about it, it sounds like they're actually expecting me to go through some sort of like long initiatory process and actually go and like learn this ancient knowledge. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the story, this community is cut off from the outside world almost entirely. You can't even enter usually without written permission unless someone from the community takes you there. Someone that I know has managed to arrange this for me. But yeah, it's just wild because things keep, the dynamics of it are shifting a bit, and I have no idea how much I'm going to be expected to pay or how long this initiatory process is going to go on. Obviously, I can't say no, but I wasn't really prepared. I thought I was going to go up there, interview some people, you know, and maybe for a few days, but it's sounding like just based on this person's, what is the word? You know, whatever they told them about me, they've decided that, you know, we're going to let this outsider in and teach him all this stuff. So, great time to support the channel, become a patron, or there's options in the chat because, you know, we're demonetized. I don't really have funds for this sort of thing. We're trying to get this retreat done, which means I have to reserve, you know, a property and pay for all this stuff. And so it's kind of caught me off guard because it's like absolutely essential that I do this, but I'm like not really prepared to just disappear into the mountains for an undisclosed amount of time, and I don't know what it's going to cost. And yeah, so I'll keep you guys updated. It's a super interesting thing, could be really important. I'm sure it is. But, you know, kind of like almost in shock by the realization that this is not, you know, they're not perceiving this to be like a 2 or 3 day visit. This is like a real sort of apprenticeship or something someone has in mind. So yeah, I'll keep you guys posted. But, you know, thinking about all this stuff and looking out across the, I mean, for me, it's my phone and this computer for 6 years almost. I haven't been to the United States. All I have is this window. You know, I've been in the jungle in the middle of nowhere, and then I've been in the Andes in a small town. The disconnect between me and whatever's happening out there in the, you know, European and Russian and the United States, I'm not there, you know. So all I have is the limited perspective of being online. But I think there's probably not a person out there watching this that doesn't agree with me, that it's very clear that things have gone off the rails, that particularly in the United States, people are completely losing their minds. And the sole cause of it is the influence, even if you're not religious, the Judeo-Christian influence, for one thing. I mean, you know, I talk about this a lot. I've made a lot of long videos about this. But, you know, there's just so many aspects of it. But probably the most relevant thing, and this mostly applies to like far-right, you know, Christian fundamentalist types, although apparently 55% of the U.S. identifies as born again, which is wild, right? But when you are forced to hold cognitive dissonance in your mind in order to maintain a belief system, this informs how you process your entire reality. And this is why these people can be so completely out of touch and unaware of the actual reality that confronts them. I mean, think about this. Spirituality is supposed to be the product of wisdom, of interfacing with the universe and having experiences that inform you of certain things. And if you have a book that comes into conflict with those realities in explicitly obvious ways, you would think that the book is wrong, because reality is reality. And yet, that's not what we experience, right? And then on the other side of the token, 20 years ago, right, in like, say, 2000, when I was in my early 20s, people on the left hated censorship. They wanted people to be able to live in whatever way they wanted as long as it didn't harm anyone else, right? People thought for themselves. You could have dynamic, substance-ridden, you could have dynamic conversations of profound substance with people. And the indoctrination did not interfere much. The right and the left at that time had more common ground than they had ever had throughout the rest of my life. The bigotry had diminished. Tolerance of homosexuals had increased. I grew up with a right that the president's wife, Ronald Reagan's wife, actually said that suspected drug dealers should be shot on sight, right? And if a right-winger came along, you would put your joint out and hide it because you'd be worried they called the cops. By 2000, we were going to hippie jam band festivals together, and everyone was mixing, and it seemed like, we had really finally come to a sensible place. To contrast that, today I got on Twitter, and I saw this person who had a list of pronouns there was like 10 of them. It's like he, she, zer, they, it, ew, what the fuck is that, or something, And at first, I don't know, they said that you cannot be out in the streets hollering about free Palestine if you're celebrating the 4th of July. Because you're celebrating exactly the same kind of genocidal colonialism that you are protesting in Palestine. And so for the first 3 sentences, I was like, right on, lady, that actually, excuse me, I have no idea what it was. Person, but then it just went completely off the deep end, and it literally sounded like someone reading like a summation of the extreme left-wing narrative. Like, whose freedom are you celebrating anyways? Only rich, white, male, not gay people, not black people, and I was like, oh my God. And I'm just sharing that story to try to kind of elucidate the severity of the indoctrination that we're dealing with at this point. I mean, it is so over the top insane. You look at the situation with Donald Trump, for example. Three of the Supreme Court justices were nominated by him. How, first of all, is it even legal for them to rule on a case involving him? That's pure insanity. If there's any conflict of interest in a criminal or civil case, any ethical judge recuses themselves. They remove themselves. And you would think that at the highest court in the United States, the rules would be more strict. They wouldn't just go out the window. And so, on top of that, you have this presidential transition bill of 2025 or whatever. I'm not exactly sure the name of it. It's not a bill even. It's like the Heritage Foundation or something. It's their plan to fire all of the Democrats from the federal government and replace them with people chosen by the new dictator. They want to purge the colleges. They want to dismantle all of the government agencies. That I totally would agree with that if it wasn't for the fact that they will be replaced by organizations that are driven by one man. I'm not saying all this necessarily to put down Trump. I'm trying to point out the cognitive dissonance of people that claim to be conservative, that say they want to preserve the Constitution, they want to preserve the American way. I have to also mention, while we're on the subject, that if you see what has happened in the United States, I don't know how in the hell anyone could say, we need to keep going this way, you know? I mean, clearly it's not working. But you know what I mean? For these people to be the flag-waving, freedom-loving, supposedly conservative, and they want to just completely destroy everything that supposedly makes America America. And they're not even aware of it. They're not even aware of it. It has gotten to a point that is so disturbing and so surreal that I question whether this is even reality, you know? I remember after the, what was it, the Terrence Howard on Rogan, when I started reading the comments and realized that people thought that this guy was literally a genius, I was honestly wondering if I had died. Because it is that insane. And just another quick point, partly to plug my next video, but also because it's relevant. I think one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves and for everyone else right now is to really apply ourselves to objective analysis, right? And really find the strength to be completely honest with ourselves, not in a way that puts people down necessarily, but just purely for the sake of understanding, right? But remember that the subject here is basically indoctrination and the power of it. After the Terrence Howard reaction video, Billy Carson came on Joe Rogan. And that guy just is full of shit, like incredibly. And so Professor Dave, who is this like science guy, right? He does a reaction to this Billy Carson thing. And I started watching it and I realized that I spent, I think, you know, I've done about half of it now. I think I spent more time debunking Professor Dave than I did Billy Carson. And let me just give you one example of how like shocking this was. Every time, for example, Billy Carson's like, well, I don't know why they wanted gold, you know, the ancient cultures. It must be because aliens were having them mine it or whatever. I mean, it takes like 1 minute to Google and see like, oh, the Incas had this spiritual connection with gold because they saw it as crystallized sunlight. The alchemists saw gold as literally crystallized consciousness. The Aztecs, the Egyptians, all very, very similar. What do you mean you don't know, Billy? You're an expert on ancient cultures, right? I mean, this is not hard. So Dave very rightly says, you know, these guys need to spend 5 minutes just checking into these things before they talk about them. And then Billy Carson says something that's actually true. He says there's this magnetic field, and there are ways to manipulate the DNA, and that's not exactly right. But Dave jumps in and he says, no, there is no electrical field that can be interacted with in any way that would cause complex changes to occur in proteins and enzymes. Really, Dave? Michael Levin. So in this video, you'll see I immediately go to Michael Levin showing these planariums, these worms, that they have used the electrical field to manipulate them so that their progeny have two heads without changing the genome. Dave, you mean you didn't even Google this? I mean, you're a science guy. You're not keeping up with the cutting edge research? Like, what is this? And it gets even crazier because I was able to answer all the questions about how it works. It turns out DNA has capacity to act as an antenna that interfaces with this field. This is all 5 years old, right? And so my real point here is that the belief system, the paradigm that informed Professor Dave's worldview has him so trapped in his assumptions that I was able to do that to him. I mean, it's brutal. Wait till you guys see the video. It's a slaughter. We have to come to terms with what we're actually dealing with here. If you are a free-thinking person, if you have even the slightest bit of illumination or enlightenment, which is, it's not, either or, it's a spectrum just like everything else. You have self-awareness. You can see the mechanisms of control. You can do simple analysis and understand why people are behaving the way they're behaving. If you look out into the world, you guys, I mean, a solid majority of these people, there's no thinking happening. I mean, I know it sounds insane, and we kind of make jokes about it, like, oh, the muggles, and, but it's true. It's actually that bad, that people are confined in these mind-forged manacles. And, the thing is, there are antidotes. There is a way to correct all of this. There are answers. It's not impossible to change the trajectory. It's extremely unlikely, and it's very difficult. But it's not impossible. We have the tools, we have the resources, we have access to the knowledge. I talk about this a lot, but it's an absolute certainty for me that what is motivating the consolidation of the parties in the United States into a single party, what is driving the propaganda machine to create all of this fear and dissonance, is the fact that the old paradigm is already dead. And when you are armed with the basic knowledge that the universe provides for any person that is willing to deconstruct, to search their being for maleficent influences from culture, from religion, these people are not subject to control. They do not need to be controlled, and they will not tolerate it. And so it is precisely because we are so close to being able to step out from under the shadow of history. Science is starting to sound awfully panpsychic. The entire materialist paradigm has been oriented around taking the ineffable, the mysteries and miracles of the universe, and reducing them to the level of the mundane. Transcendental experiences restore your sight. And the most cutting-edge research in neuroscience, morphology, physics, all of it is unveiling the wiring under the board as being fundamentally transcendental. I don't know if I explained that as well as I was hoping to, but if this process is allowed to continue, people continue to take psychedelics, people continue to increase their spiritual practices and improve their diet and, reject processed food, and then all of this science emerging to paint a completely different picture of an intelligent, living universe. The occasional transcendental experience is going to be supplanted by a transcendental existence. And that is what has always been there. That is what has always been there. And, I don't necessarily believe 100% that the entire modern ontology was specifically engineered to suppress that knowledge. A lot of it was it's just a convenient circumstance for the overlords. But I think once the ball got rolling, they have definitely gone way out of their way to ensure this disconnect. And something I noticed at the debates that was really telling, that sort of exposes the degree to which this is all a farce. The elections and the politicians and all of it. When Trump and Biden were debating, there are so many potent, devastating things that either of them could have said about the other that were 100% true. They only mentioned the stuff that has been constantly cycled through the media. They are informing in your mind the perceptions that they have approved for you. If Biden and Trump were really trying to tear each other to the ground, Trump would have been talking about the 1994 crime bill and all of the millions of black men that were put in jail because Biden was trying to solve the unemployment crisis at the time. He would have mentioned that Biden he had to drop out of the primaries against Obama because he said articulate, clean, well-educated black man. You just don't get that. And on and on and on and on and on. And there were even soft pitches that were thrown out there when Biden starts talking about how he fixed the economy. And why isn't Trump saying, well, you shut the whole world down and then you took over and opened it back up, and you're calling that like come on, dude. I think, one of the things I've observed is that people are clinging to an obviously dead paradigm, even to the extent that it's almost like, we collectively have a huge anchor in our hand that we could just release and let it sink without us. And instead of doing that, people are just holding on to it. They know it's an anchor and that it's sinking. But it's like they just can't let go. And so what does that mean for the rest of us? Where does that leave the rest of us? You can't reason with them, because once these, cognitive biases and cognitive dissonance have been entrenched, if you challenge them, it's a psychological mechanism that it triggers the fight or flight reflex. This stuff is wired into our survival instincts. You can't reason with them. So what can we do? What can we do? And how little time do we have? The only answer that I can come up with is basically the idea that I started this stream with. We have to completely stop playing along. Completely. Do not humor people. Do not humor your relatives. Do not pretend to comply with the pressures of herd conformity in order to, whatever that's for, I don't really know, social status and lubrication, whatever. We have to loudly, staunchly, and resolutely proclaim the truth at all times without hesitation, without compromise, and we have to live in such a way that it makes other people envious. That is actually the whole mechanism behind the success of social media. I wish it wasn't true. I do. Back in the late 90s when the internet first came, we were so full of hope that this means that information can be disseminated freely and people can educate themselves and it will accelerate the evolutionary trajectory of mankind and all of these magical, wonderful things will come from it. But it turns out that if you have a culture that is dying from a crisis of purpose, and the individuals in it, it's like there was somebody here a while back that was talking about how their parent had basically always said to them, like, okay, well, I've given you everything materially, financially, all this stuff. And his response was like, well, what about like meaningful guidance and love and all of this stuff? Big Brother in the United States, it's the same thing. And so you have this completely just disconnected, fragmented collective psyche without a seed of purpose in it, except for a very small group of individuals. And so, because of that, when there is a crisis, when people are already empty, they can be filled with anything. And so I kind of deviated from my point, which was that ego becomes the predominant constituent of the psyche in the absence of substance, right? That's really why we hate egomaniacs. Because they, ruffle their feathers and they puff their chests and they are condescending, but there's no substance behind it. And so we have this situation where if you don't have a purpose to fulfill, you're not going to pursue information. You're not going to pursue knowledge. You're not going to pursue wisdom. The shadow is driving the boat. And one of the reasons for that is in the United States, there was an anti-intellectualism that became a sort of rampant phenomenon, probably due to social engineering, that made these things unenvious. People do not care if you're intelligent. People do not envy someone who can do calculus. They envy somebody with 10 million followers in a Lamborghini. So, I have to be honest because it's not my style to try to paint a rosier picture than reality actually is presenting. But we're still here. We're still trying. We're still living. We're still loving. And there's still a tremendous amount of potential. So it may not be what we want to see, but it is true that those of us that feel we have found a sensible path, a meaningful path, a purposeful path. We have to live in such a way that it gets the attention of the people who have no purpose, who are lost and adrift. It's the only thing we can do. It's the only thing we can do. Just checking in with the chat real quick and see if there's... So that's really it, I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy to be an American and realize that you have to try to convince people that nationalism is nothing but a mechanism of control. That's all it is. There's nothing more to it. You don't need nationalism. You need a moral code. And that moral code should be something along the lines of love your brother, neighbor, love your neighbor as you would love yourself. Not often you catch me quoting Jesus, but, that's really the fundamental thing. One of the other really mind-blowing aspects of this that is just so hard for me to get over is the fact that, many years ago I realized this. Most of the arguing about what is in the best interest of humanity, what sort of financial system, capitalism, socialism, communism. By the way, why don't we hear about any new isms? Like, why would anyone think that any 200-year-old system would be the ideal, think about this. Where is the syncretism? Where is the innovation? Why are we still talking about all these old, crusty, dusty isms? But all of this argument, almost all of it, is nothing but the product of indoctrination and propaganda. Because at the end of the day, what suits humanity best, what would benefit us the most, the system that would work the best for us, it's algorithmic. It's algorithmic. It is definitely within our powers to take all of the information and the relevant circumstances and synthesize them in an algorithm and come up with a system that would unarguably suit us better than any of the systems from the past. And the only reason that that isn't happening is the brainwashed, dogmatic conviction of people that do not even think. That's the reality that we're living in. And the reason that the systems that we have, these old systems that are just, that people just keep recycling through, like, well, should we be socialist? Should we be communist? Should we be, you know what I mean? Those are all designed to benefit the overlords. That's why they are just this merry-go-round of the same bullshit without anything really substantially new. Now, there are some European countries that have happiness indexes way, 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 way higher than the United States. I think the U.S. is like 33 at this point. Now, what other metric is more important, first of all? What other metric? How many zeros are behind the digit in your bank account? I mean, that's more important than your happiness. And those countries have hybridized systems that are improvements and innovations upon pre-existing systems that have been combined so that their best aspects are, integrated. And so that's the thing, people in the United States will tell you, like, well, you just complain and don't have any answers. Yes, we do. Well, do you have proof? Yeah. Yep. Google it. Just Google it. Just look. There are happier countries with systems like democratic socialism that are, capitalist, but also, and here's another one. You know how Americans freak out when they hear socialism? You work until Wednesday, halfway through Wednesday, before you start getting your money in the United States. And yet you don't have health care. You're already living under basically a socialist tax system, but you're not getting the benefits. And they actually have a good portion of the population defending their overlords' right to stand on their fucking throats and take everything from them and give them nothing in return. Definitely time to stop being polite, which doesn't mean that we should be rude. Exactly. But, we cannot make any more concessions. And we have to live in accordance with what we know to be true and correct, regardless of judgment, regardless of alienation, regardless of ostracization, regardless of anything at all, anything whatsoever. Because not only do the answers exist, they're already being employed in many places. And I'm sure they could all stand to be improved, but that's what time is for. At this point, the veil between the illusion and the obvious realities is beyond paper thin. And yet, it might as well be a steel curtain for a lot of people. And so, I also want to mention we are still booking for the events here in the Sacred Valley in August and September, and it is incredible here. So, we have a bunch of repeat visitors, which is nice because I know a lot of the group that's going to be here already. There's, just really going to be a few people that are new. And, if you join our Patreon, you can join the voice chats. This Saturday, we're doing one at 3 for our European people that are on a different schedule. And, and even if you don't want to join my community, join some kind of community. We have to network. We have to take meaningful steps to empower each other. We have to take meaningful steps to encourage each other. And we have to double down on our own efforts to fully realize ourselves and to walk with knowledge wisely. Any minute now, these motherfuckers are probably going to start kindling the same energy that lights the stars upon each other in the form of nukes. I mean, and it's wild to realize how many people have tried to warn the populace. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick in case any of you guys didn't see it. I want to read you this quote from Frank Zappa, who had an IQ of 172. This is from 1977. The illusion of freedom will continue as long as it's profitable to continue the illusion. At the point where the illusion becomes too expensive to maintain, they will just take down the scenery, they will pull back the curtains, they will move the tables and chairs out of the way, and you will see the brick wall at the back of the theater. Damn, Frank. Well, I can see the brick wall at the back of the theater. For sure. It's incredible how many of the most intelligent people among us have tried to tell, the muggles this stuff since forever, really. And instead of allowing the light of genius to guide their path, instead of becoming your own Prometheus to burn the tethers of the overlords, people look across to the average person and conform to whatever they think the approved narrative of their demographic is. This also needs to stop. This is one of the great faults of democracy. Real leaders just organically rise to the top. They percolate to the top. Allowing a bunch of poorly educated, stark raving mad, lunatics to choose the person that can hit a button that will end the world is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard of in my life. Nothing about this world makes sense. And I'm telling you folks, it doesn't have to be this way. I am not a utopian. I know that the universe will always be composed of equal parts of antinomies, of equal and opposite, interacting forces. This is what gives rise to all of the things in the center that make life possible. But I do know that we could re-engineer the systems that support human life in such a way as to minimize the loss of human potential, to minimize the destruction of ecosystems, and to maximize the fruits of humanity, like sciences and arts and creative endeavors. And it's just, there's no excuse at this point. There's no excuse. People have already proven the better systems that can replace the ones that are failing and destroying everyone and eating people's minds. It doesn't have to be this way. So, what taking action means in this context is different for every single person. It depends on your circle of friends. It depends on your family members. It depends on your community. It depends on where you live in the world. It depends on a lot of stuff. All I can do for my part is encourage you to refine your methods, to be mindful of your language, be mindful of every breath, walk with knowledge wisely, make people envious in the best possible way. Be subtle, but be cunning. And so, with that, you guys, I am going to sign off. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Consider joining our Patreon. I'm demonetized. I get no support for this. I'm really trying to raise money to go up into the top of the mountains with this uncontacted community and try to document and learn this ancient language. So I need funding to get this stuff done. And, the consequence of it all is very meaningful, I think. It's not just about preserving this knowledge. It's about learning it and then recontextualizing it and applying it in the context of our lives and our world. Because, I'm not necessarily of the opinion that modernity was a mistake, but there's been some severe misapplication. And the answer, which is always the answer, is integration. It is syncretism. It is, combining all of the best constituent elements from all of the relevant practices, disciplines, and traditions, and creating something that also acknowledges the wisdom and the evolution that has occurred in the modern paradigm. That is the optimal protocol for conscious evolution. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me, and hit the like button. Please share, subscribe, consider supporting the channel in some way, shape, or form, and I will see you guys tomorrow night for a music stream. It's going to be the first one in at least a month, so looking forward to that, and ciao.